What does it take to break the cycle of who you are and reincarnate to a refined version of yourself? Hi, this is Takatoshi Shibayama, the host of the Future Design Podcast. In this episode, I have Johnson Chong, an artist, a yogi, a life coach, and the author of Sage Sapien. In his autobiography, he takes us through his difficult upbringing as an immigrant child in the US, the dilemmas while growing up psychologically and physically, and being reborn into multiple incarnations of himself. It's an extremely riveting book as he talks to us about spirituality and a way of life of embracing our true self. So stick around to the end.
Future Design Podcast.
So, I did have a great read through this, and this is the part that I was really intrigued by, and it comes from the beginning, which I really liked, and I just wanted to see, if you can elaborate more. I read it. It says, "The sooner we realize that the purpose of life is to help each other untangle from proverbial emotional luggage we came with, the happier we will be."
Yeah. Emotional baggage, luggage, whatever you want to call it. There was this really funny comic that I saw. I don't know where I saw it, but there was this image of a conveyor belt with different size pieces of suitcases, and the catchphrase underneath the conveyor belt was, "I'll carry yours if you carry your mother's."
Okay.
And so I thought, oh, wow, that's very telltale of how our society is. We unconsciously receive programming from our parents on behavior, on the way, on how we even make decisions and act in life.
Sure.
Right. So
Yeah.
it's all of this that we, as we grow older, we start to unpack because we think that that's the way we're supposed to exist. As children, we look up to our parents as role models.
Right.
And some children are very fortunate to be in households where everything is smooth and full of love. And unfortunately, some children are not. And, I grew up in one of those households where it was full of unspoken, repressed trauma that my parents were dealing with. And that rubbed off on me growing up, even if I didn't know or understand fully at that time what that
Right.
was.
Yeah, because you don't really know about the history of your parents that when you're young, right? What they been through, and also you tend to look up to your parents as thinking that's the standard. They're perfect, right? Perfect as a parent. But the older you get, you understand that your parents are actually normal people, just like you and I, and they have their imperfections everywhere. And that's kind of when you start to rethink about what the things that they taught you. I think, is that really correct? I mean, is that or even is it right for this time as well? And maybe that's the untangling of the past teachings of your parents.
For sure. My parents are very, I wouldn't say the most PC. I would say they're even a little bit racist because they are programmed in such a way from where they grew up, from being in such a homogenous culture in rural China to then being thrown into America because they had to flee for their lives. They were refugees.
Right.
And so during the Cultural Revolution, coming from land-owning families, they were targeted. And the only other option was to flee. And so they fled and they swam to Hong Kong. 7 days, 7 nights. It was very dramatic. They packed up all their belongings, and then they, from Shenzhen to Hong Kong, there's that gap between China and Hong Kong. And so they went in the dark of night and snuck their way into the foothills of Hong Kong, and this was in the 70s.
Yeah.
And then after a decade or so, my mom, actually, she applied for asylum during the Jimmy Carter era,
Right.
when the Vietnamese boat people were coming to America at the trail end of the American-Vietnam War. And so that was their pathway into America. It wasn't, I think there are essentially two types of immigrants that go to America. Those who are trying to attain some version of the American dream, make it big. Maybe they come from not so traumatic, pasts. And then there are those who have come from violent oppressive situations, and they're forced out of their country, and they see America as this beacon of hope, and it's this land of promise that everyone talks about. And so my parents fall into the latter category. And so when you're in a new country where you're not necessarily, that's not the first choice. You're there because you're there to survive. This is necessary for your survival. You then get into this mode of, I need to survive my life instead of thrive. And so all of the programs that they've programmed into me, so I like to use the metaphor of us as like computer programs, like, our brain, and the things that we learn from them. Save every single cent. Right? So they penny pinched everything, and we weren't allowed to enjoy our money. That wasn't a value that we were taught. We were taught to save everything. We were taught that money is time. We were taught these things very subtly. And so to the point where, when I started teaching yoga, and I ran a studio in New York for 3 years, a holistic studio, and I was a teacher, and I was a general manager, and I managed staff. It was very hard for me to take care of the studio and make it profitable and abundant, because I had all these issues with money, and that came from my parents. Something as simple as that.
Right. And I guess during when you were in school, you didn't go out and do part-time jobs or anything.
Oh, I did. I started working when I was 13, because there was this thing I grew up in New York City. So there was this thing called SYEP, which was Summer Youth Employment Program. And my parents wanted us to learn the value of earning money through hard work. And so that was another value, that only hard work matters, and you have to put your time in. So it's like, we're gonna work our asses off. And I remember it was about maybe $4.80 or $5 an hour. And my first ever job where I was paid from the government was this after-school program during the summer, where I helped the teacher assistants take care of elementary school kids. And it was kind of like babysitting, essentially. And then every summer, I would either go to some sort of enrichment class, which is what Asian kids always did. You would learn the curriculum for the following year, or I would be at some sort of summer, job exchange program.
Right. But it's, in those times, even though you were living in a very Chinese family, you did have some influence from the outside as well. I mean, New York is a very vibrant, fast-running, city with a vibrant economy. I mean, I'm sure there was a lot that you took in from there as well.
Yes, I think that the absorption of culture around wasn't conscious until high school. It just was there, and that was the reality that I accepted. There are so many immigrant communities that you start to learn about, even as you don't even know about them growing up there, and then you slowly oh my God, there's a Polish neighborhood, there's a Russian neighborhood, there's a Greek neighborhood where no one speaks English. How does this happen? And so New York City is this very interesting bubble, just like Singapore is a bubble, where you don't necessarily need English to get by, because there are so many immigrants there, and people are holding on to these past ideas of where they were from, and in some ways people are even more attached to a certain time period, a certain way of being. And so they start to input these programs into their children and bringing them up, because they didn't get to have the life they wanted to live. This was their backup plan. And so now you're going to live vicariously through your children. I remember when I was growing up, I would have to help my parents translate. And we would go to the water bureau to argue the water bill, the heating bill, the gas, whatever it was. I was always at some sort of government building arguing for my parents, even though I knew that they were half in the wrong, but they were just there to fight. They wanted to lower the gas bill or something. But I had to stand up for my parents. But then, of course, in school, we're taught honesty and all these values. And here I am trying to, play this, little 8-year-old, 10-year-old attorney for my parents, and and you're almost expected to protect them at all costs, and so there's these conflicting values of, I'm a foreigner in this country, and we need to do everything we have to do to fight to survive at all costs, and you have to help defend us. But yet we want you to have a good education and get a good job. And those values that you learn in school, yes, learn those, but not these ones. Right. And so that, and I wasn't quite conscious of all those things until, I was older and looking back at how my parents raised me and seeing, all of this negative programming that they've plugged in.
Right.
But I mean, it wasn't, they did their best. And I'm not, ragging on my parents, but that's just, that's where they came from.
Right.
They lost their parents at a rather young age, so
Yeah.
they didn't have many role models.
Right.
And they also were in a very strange time in history where they, my father comes from 17 generations of judges and ministers, and my mother, her father actually was an English translator for the Nationalist Party.
Oh, okay.
And so they came from very educated families, but yet they weren't very educated. My mom had a third grade education.
Right.
And so I have people, here are people who come from these, prominent families, and then all of a sudden they're reduced to poverty,
Right.
and very little education, and then they're traumatized, all this violence, people in their families dying, getting
Right,
murdered,
Yeah.
and so how else are you supposed to raise your kids?
Right.
No one knows about therapy.
Yeah. I think that was kind of like frowned upon if you even did that. You kind of like deal it with yourself kind of attitude, I guess.
Yeah, and that's how my dad dealt with most of his emotions. I watched him. He basically held everything in. When we were growing up, he wasn't very present. He was supposed to be the breadwinner for the family. So, and I could feel that as a child, that he had put on this responsibility of having to support the family. And so he would come home and be very upset at my mom if my mom didn't prepare, a hot meal for him.
Right.
But my mom's sometimes busy taking care of 3 kids.
Yeah.
So maybe she can't prepare a hot meal on time. And so then they would get into like a very physical or, very verbal fight. And this was kind of how my father dealt with his emotions. He would always try to protect us from his, bursts, but with my mother, she kind of like bore the brunt of it. And then my mom would kind of explode on us. And it was really just a reflection of how their upbringing was. And if you look at the dynamic of country to citizen, of China to, how China or the Communist Party of China at that time treated their people, especially the people from the old regime, that was kind of how they were treating us, in a way. It's like, you don't know anything but violence. So if we're angry at something, we're just going to hit you.
Right.
Because that's all we know.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, because part of me thinks that if they go to a new country, they're free from all those past traumas, and then can open up and say, take in new, values and say, well, we want better for our children, right? I mean, was that part of their psyche as well? Or do you think it, past trauma just kind of dragged on along with them?
Well, I don't think anyone comes into this world saying, I want to suck at life.
Yeah.
And I want to make all the wrong choices. I think that their intentions are there, but it's their experiences that have colored their choices. So they want better, but their definition of better is colored by their history. So, and how can I understand that? I can know about that intellectually. And the only reason I know about my parents' past is when they would get into this very heightened emotional state where they can no longer hold it anymore. And they're so frustrated at me and my siblings that they just exploded out of either rage or grief or whatever it was. And they just started revealing little bits about, this was the time when, your grandmother was hung from the rafters of the bedroom that my father and his mother shared, and he was 16, and he came home and found that his mother was hung from the ceiling. And then he just like breaks down and cries, and you as a child are like, what just happened? And why did he just all of a sudden throw this really heavy piece of information at me? Is it because he wants me to know about my history? Is it because he's trying to guilt me? Is it because he no longer knows how to deal with his emotions and play the father role, and he just is broken down? And so all these thoughts as a child go through your head, and all you can feel is sympathy for your parents. But then you're also put in this very weird place because you go, wait, but they're my parents. They're supposed to be strong. They're supposed to look after me. And then you see them in a very quote unquote weak place. I mean, we all have places where and I don't want to say weak as in bad, but vulnerable. That's a better word. They were in a very vulnerable place, but you don't ever see that, except for when they get really, and so I mean, it's
probably not something that you want to see either, right? As a child.
Well, it's just, well, I don't know. I mean, I think there is a level of strength in revealing your vulnerability. However, revealing your vulnerability because you don't know how, because you have pent up emotions and you don't know how to express it and you explode, that's probably not so healthy. You know, like for example, telling children that it's okay to cry if you feel hurt. It's okay to express how to feel upset at someone because they stole your toy, right? That's not okay. You know, and you should tell them it's not okay. But then to take it further, and like, oh, you should go beat that kid up. I mean, there's boundaries, right? And so my parents didn't have very good boundaries,
right?
Because of their history, and so their definition of better, like a better life for me and my brother and my sister, was what they wanted for themselves. And they didn't get that opportunity. They got to America in their early 30s, and right away they went straight to work. And they would go and take English classes at the church on Sundays. That was in Chinatown, and it was offered for free. But that wasn't enough to immerse them into, you know. And also they were in the Chinatown area of Brooklyn. So you have all these Chinese people, and you're surrounded by Chinese friends, and you have all of these planning councils and associations that translate for you to help you get your paperwork and get through the day. And then you have your children who are learning English and they're helping you. So you don't learn to become independent. And so that's kind of, so a lot of that responsibility of becoming, or so as a child, it became more responsible. You know, I grew up very, very quickly.
I'm sure you were very precocious, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure all your siblings were too.
Yeah. No, we
have an older brother, right, and a younger sister.
Yes, I have an older brother and younger sister. So I have the middle child syndrome, and yeah. So that's a New York City experience, and I think because of that, I was naturally very inquisitive as a child as to why things are the way they are. And even in class, in school, in English class, when we were, reading literature or whatever it was, I would always raise my hand and I would kind of I would be like devil's advocate and wait, what about this? What about that? And yeah.
Yeah, you do talk about like having a bit of a rebellious side to you growing up. I'm sure that was a reflection of the way your parents treated you, or maybe the frustrations you had having to deal with the family affairs, I guess. I mean, there was some stuff that you wrote in the book that was pretty brutal. Like you were plucking out eyeballs from the goldfish from your brother's friend upstairs or something like that. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that, and normally you would think, oh man, this guy's fucked up, right?
Well, as a child, I had a lot of impulses to express myself, but I remember that my mother, when you're a mother of 3 and you don't have, the support of like a babysitter and you have to work a full-time job, she's a seamstress, she's making clothes on the side, she's taking care of 3 kids. My brother's 13 months older than me and my sister's like 3.5 years younger, and so we're quite close in age. You're juggling all these things. It's not like in Singapore where everyone has a helper to take care of the kids. And so when I wanted to express or feel, I was a very feely kid, kinesthetic. I was always in my body. I was very quiet as a kid. I didn't talk so much. I would kind of just sit there and look at things and feel things. Because partly I was really confused as to my environment, because at home we spoke Cantonese, and even though we were born and raised in America, that was the first thing I heard. So I learned to speak late because everyone around me was speaking in all different kinds of accents. Living in Brooklyn from 0 to 7, you hear Jamaican accents, you have Mexicans. There's so many different. You have the Jewish accent. There is so many people and diverse cultures, and it's a melting pot. And so as a child, I got very confused. And so I would just sit there and just kind of feel my way around, like, what's happening? Where am I? And I lost my train of thought.
It's all right.
And so, so because I was a very emotional child, I would I would act out
Yeah.
in a way that my mom might not want,
Right.
because she needed to carry on and do her job and take care of the kids, and she had a whole routine. And so she would say no, or she would hit, and because I wouldn't stop, I'm a child, I want to express, that's what children do. They want to express, they want to create, they want to feel. So she would hit me. And so that became this pattern. And so I started to associate my feelings with punishment. So every time I felt something, oh, okay, don't feel that. So it became quite numb. And it was just like walking around like, oh God, okay, I shouldn't feel this. And so over time, it just kind of, it just bottled up in me to the point where when I didn't get what I wanted, I acted out. I did all those terrible things to my neighbor because my neighbor did not let me play Super Mario Brothers or whatever it was on the Super Nintendo because apparently I sucked. So now I was made to feel worthless, and I wasn't allowed to play. And so I did what my parents did to me when, they used physical punishment as a way to reprimand me. And so then I was like, well, what can I do to punish this person for not allowing me to be me? So then I would go and like, well, I'm going to go take his goldfish and pluck all his eyes out. I mean, that was the, that was my child logic. That's what I, and so, and I don't, and the thing is like, if you read it, yes, it can be a bit fucked up, but if you think about it, those were the circumstances I was put in, and I didn't have space to express my creativity, and it wasn't until about 10 when my mom put me into piano lessons and kung fu lessons. That's when I stopped doing that kind of stuff. Because I used to even take my cats. We had a lot of cats growing up because they would go to the basement and eat the mice and stuff. I used to put them in scalding hot water.
Damn. No.
I was a terrible child because I had no creative outlet. So I was like, let me play God and let me play with life and see what kind of hurt I can create because people are hurting me.
Right.
And so I didn't know this, of course, as a 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old.
Sure,
I was just doing it because it gave me a sense of control and a sense of power over my surroundings because my parents were hurting me, physically, verbally, emotionally. And so the only way that I could, take control of my life was to hurt things that were smaller than me. I hurt my sister a lot, and this is something that I had to work on with my sister and repairing our relationship. In our 20s, there's a lot of reparations and reconciliation that had to happen, and a lot of apologizing because I was a hurt people, right? And I hurt her a lot, like physically as a kid,
right? Yeah, I mean, there are things that you said where parents always demand respect for their kids, but maybe it's the kids that needs to be respected, right? Because they're pure, they don't have a form, and whatever you do to them, it transmits completely into the child without right or wrong. And if you treat your child being them and saying really bad hurtful words to them, that could just transmit out of them in the same way, and because you don't respect how they are, how shapeless they are around that age, that's what can happen. So it's not about respecting the parents. I mean, I think it has to go both ways as well, and I agree with what you say.
Yeah, for sure. There has to be. It's a two-way street. It's not a one-way street, and I think a lot of Chinese principles are founded on filial piety, which is, I'm the elder, so you must respect me. And my teacher's teacher, my spiritual teacher, his teacher was, Rajneesh, right, Osho. And so, and he talks a lot about this. He talks about respecting the purity and the innocence of the child, because you look at an older person who is set in their ways, they're on their way out. Yeah. And they're colored with their history, and they're stuck in their ways. And I mean, I'm not saying this is a blanket statement for like all older people. I mean, that's not to say that all older people are like this, but most older people are. There's a certain way of being that's been set.
You're always looking at through a colored lens.
Yeah.
Right?
And so our world, if you think about our world, it's governed by older people from a different generation, from a different set of beliefs. But if we're trying to cultivate a world where we want the best for our children, we need to listen to our children.
Yeah.
We need to listen to their voices because they're less impacted by all of the crap and all of the trauma and all of the baggage and all the hurt and all the pain and all of the attachments.
Sure. Yeah, it's true. I mean, maybe a 16-year-old teenager should be, scolding us about how we treat our climate as well. I mean, that is purely true. I mean, what she says about, what we care about is economic growth and how we're going to, produce more growth in its economy and focusing all our minds on something that actually at the same time destroys, the climate. Maybe we're really focusing on the wrong things. And then, we were designed to think about growth first, right? And, like, how do you, we were never, maybe when I was younger, it was, this whole idea of like, climate change and all that stuff is relatively like 20 years old, right? Or maybe a little bit older than that. But, definitely when I was like in my, teens, it wasn't really talked about that much, at least for my generation. And so we kind of live on thinking like, what is important. I mean, it's the older people telling us what's important, right? And then we just like suck it in, and then we think that's what it's supposed to be. But if you take a, more, a purer form of a person who actually can look at the world without these colored lenses and say, what's more important? Well, actually, you're killing your fucking world, your planet, right? What's more important than that? That's kind of something that we need to have a reality check on.
I remember when I was in earth science class in the 5th and 6th, maybe, around that time, 5th and 6th grade, we were learning about the polar ice caps melting. And this was in the 90s. And I remember feeling really, really sad. This profound sadness took me over, and I did everything in my power to, I was even trying to teach my parents, like, oh, we need to recycle. And recycling wasn't that big a thing then. It was like just starting to become, regular. Yeah. And so I remember being an advocate of this, but I got punished for it.
Oh, really?
It's like, because my parents were about money. It was because they equated money to survival. It wasn't in their, there was no direct translation as to how recycling was going to say, like how it was going to put food on their table. That wasn't their priority.
Sure.
But, children are our heart. As children, we want to expand and grow and feel and play like from here. And as we get older, we get stuck in our minds. And so there's this transition. And there needs to be a bridge between the mind and the heart. We can't just have one or the other, because if we just listen to children all the time, we just, we'll be playing all the time, which is great. But there is also a time and place for structure.
Right.
And as adults, we have to remember that we were children at one point. Yeah. And so a lot of the work that I do with my clients, when I coach them, I do energetic work with them, is to connect them to what we call the inner child. Yeah. And everyone has an inner child, whether that child was wounded, whether that child was accepted, whatever. That child, that archetype of the child wants to play. The child has passions and dreams that are raw and unfiltered, and we need to meet those needs that are subconscious or kind of, buried away and reclaim them. And if we don't, then we move through our life very passionless. Right. And you see this in theater, right? The theater training is all about saying yes and about playing. And so when you see actors on stage, this just looks like, even if they're playing very depressing characters or really sad stories, they are in a sense of play, the energy of play. They're allowed to go into the depths of those emotions because the container that's set around that stage is like, you get to go explore. Whereas most people in corporate anywhere, it's here's our KPI or whatever, right?
Yeah, we all live very cerebral lives, right? It's all, the emphasis, especially in the Western society, is about logic and applying logic to, investments or business development or all of these things. And we don't really are taught how to think through our heart or our feelings. And that's completely, I think, eradicated from, business, right? In some sense. So, when you talk about like, detachment from the mind and the body and feeling from the body, I mean, sometimes it's really hard for me to understand as well, because the training that I had through, my teenage life, corporate life, all that had nothing to do with that. And and I'm sure a lot of your clients are, feeling just the same, right?
Sure. I mean, that's a hard one because I went to a very academic high school, and from all of us were trained to value our mind more so than our intuition or our feelings. That is all educational systems across like this country, unless there's some indigenous tribe somewhere that's educating their children in a different way. But we're taught to value the capacity of the mind and the intelligence of the mind more so than the intelligence of the heart.
Yeah.
We don't have classes on intuition. We don't have classes on making decision or developing trust or building relationships. We don't have these classes in K through 12. The classes we have are math, science. They're all very left brain topics, chemistry, algebra.
Yeah.
Things that you actually won't really need unless you're going into a very specific field of science. And so if you look at the way that we value education, our whole society, the global society, is built on the mind. And so then we kind of like spend the rest of our life trying to remember what it felt like when we were 5 years old playing in the field. And that is what people want when they have burnout or fatigue. That's what they're looking for. They're trying to remember, what the hell's the point?
Yeah.
Like, what's that feeling I'm looking for? What's that sense of play?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you had a point where you actually, your body or your senses kind of overtook your mind, right? And and can you elaborate that experience?
Sure. So yeah, I went to a very academic high school, and so I was taught to think completely through reason and logic. And by the time I went to acting conservatory, where, and this was a cerebral choice, going to acting conservatory. Well, it was a cerebral choice in the sense that, well, okay, wait, scratch that. Hold on. Ask your question again.
So when did your you thought, okay, let's get out of my head and like listen to my body, like what's more important for me, my body, than what logic is telling me. Maybe that was partly why you took some of the path. Maybe you almost said that you took acting class. It was more cerebral, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's the other way around. Maybe you actually wanted to express yourself a lot more through acting rather than going to a very academic path.
Well, there was two things that was happening actually. So there was my mind that was saying, I know I don't want this. I know I don't want to be a businessman or a lawyer or a doctor. I don't want to do anything to satisfy my parents. That was another thing. This is my rebel going, I don't want to do what they want me to do because I want to take control of my life. And then the other part was that my heart was like, oh, I actually enjoy being on stage. I like expressing myself. I find strength through embodying my voice and my body on stage through a playwright's words. And going through the range of that character's emotions because I wasn't allowed to as a child or in my home life. And so there was two things happening, and I think that was what made me go into the acting training. And then of course there was this moment I had when I was in my first year of school, of university, where I was at Geneseo, where I had this like huge epiphany moment. And then a friend kind of helped me navigate down that pathway. And then I auditioned for conservatory. I went to SUNY Purchase, and I did this 4-year conservatory. And through the 4 years, it was very challenging because my teachers would always say, you need to feel your way through. You need to feel into it. And I was thinking my way through my feelings. And that was something I was having a conversation with a friend earlier today, actually, about Singapore and how something I observe in Singapore, it's something that I used to do too, is that collectively a lot of people here they feel like they're feeling, but they're actually thinking their feelings.
Right.
So, for example, if you were to touch someone somewhere on their thigh, they may have a very low awareness as to what what's happening to their physical body. It's like we're walking around with just heads and no experience of like anything below the neck. And so I think for myself, I got so exhausted of having to think all the time. And through all of the somatic work I was doing in training, through mind-body exploratory exercises, through Alexander technique and Feldenkrais method. These were all different types of methods to connect the mind and the body. And so the mind has a role here. I mean, the beauty of the mind is that it interprets our experience that we're having in this life. And so as my body was going through like certain shifts, for example, in my physical posture, everything started physical. My neck would be forward, you know, I would be walking with this weird sway back. And so all my movement teachers would bring my awareness to the fact that I was walking like this, you know, with my neck stuck out and all these strange postural things I had developed unconsciously growing up. And once I had awareness on what was happening in my physical body, there was a mental and emotional story that was then revealed after deeper digging. So I would be laying on this table. So in Alexander technique, you have your teacher who gives you somatic cues. And somatic cues are essentially verbal suggestions that get you to deepen your awareness of what is happening in your body in that moment. Because, for example, most people in corporate, you know, they're sitting there, they have no awareness of what is happening from the neck down as they're typing and looking in the screen because they have a deadline, they have a task. And so there might be a pain happening in their lower back, but they somehow desensitize and numb themselves to the fact that that's happening, and they carry on with their work. And when you're put into conservatory where all the classes you do are just about your mind and your body connection and your authenticity and your truth, I had a meltdown. Like I literally was like, what am I doing here? It was so emotionally intense. I'm like, why am I here? And I questioned all my choices because I was now put in this environment for 4 years where I was forced to feel. And that kind of carried on into like after school and when I went to India, and in India kind of culminated in this huge experience where for the first time I was like, whoa, okay, I can actually release all of these traumatic feelings I've been holding inside. And then I was able to play, you know, on stage with a bit more freedom without having all these like insecurities that were Johnson's insecurities. But I was able to kind of free myself from that and then like play more in the character's space because I was more empty. And that goes back to emptying, you know, our emotional baggage and all the stuff that we carry, because if we walk around with all that, how are we supposed to play?
Exactly. And you have to be somebody else, right? You have to feel somebody's pain or joy that's not actually authentically yours, right? But you have to feel exactly the same as the characters in those stories. Right?
Well, and that's how I got into dangerous territory, because you can do something called substitution, where you are, for example, if you're playing a character who is dealing with the grief of losing a loved one who had a traumatic car accident, let's just say, and you yourself have never had someone, you know, that you knew, you didn't lose them from a car accident, but you know of some sort of loss, right? It could be maybe you, whatever it is, and you substitute those two things. And so then there could be a bit of a confusion as to who is who, you know? And so I had a lot of problems in school because I would think that I attached myself to my pain story. And so anytime I played a character with pain, who was suffering, I would think that I was actually suffering in that moment. And so I was using my emotional baggage to try and gain attention from my teachers to show them, hey, look at me. I have feelings. Give me an A. I want to do good because my parents think I'm worthless. So and so there was it was so layered. It was so layered and the thing is you shouldn't go into an art craft like that. I mean you should play the pain because you're so empty and the pain just flows through you because you want to tell the story and you want to, you know, give the story justice, as opposed to attention seeking or doing my own therapy through the character. Like that's not the point of acting. And then when I learned that that's what I was doing, I was like, wow, okay, this isn't this isn't healthy for me.
Yeah, yeah, because you're reliving that pain every single time you're playing that character, right?
Yeah, and I used to get really depressed after certain shows. I don't know, I always gravitated towards very dark characters because there's a part of me that really wanted to express my shadowy sides that I wasn't given permission to.
Right.
Because there was so much no in my family.
I see. So that was kind of your out, right?
Yeah.
To express your pain, your grief, whatever frustration that you have pent up, and show that through, character building in your acting class.
Yeah, and then there was a certain point where I just didn't need it anymore, and then when I realized that, I was like, wow, okay, acting in theater school was actually a bridge for me to go into the place that I am now. It was a place for me to explore the shadows so that I can come into a place where I'm not so attached to my pain story. So even writing the book about, those times where I was very anxious, or those times where I experienced really deep hurt and felt betrayed by my parents, it was hard to remember like details, because it's not that I've forgotten about it or that I've ignored it and kind of swept it under the rug. I've dealt with it. It's just that it doesn't have the same effect on me anymore when I think on it. So I don't have the same relationship to that story. And that's something that I would love to see happen more in our world. Grudges.
Yeah.
The grudges I had with my mother. I don't have that anymore with her. My mother, yes, to this day, she's still trying to change me. She still wants me to not be gay. She wants me to marry a nice Chinese girl. She wants me to have children. She wants me to get a real job. So there's all these things that she wants of me, but I don't hate her for it like I used to hate her. I love her for who she is, because I appreciate that she is doing her best, and that I can only support her in that. And yes, we don't talk so often because there's only so much time, that I can, pander to her her outbreaks, because sometimes, she gets a bit agitated in her wants of what she wants of me. So, but there's no point in harboring all of that. And when you realize that, then all these things start to unravel in your life.
Right.
Well, in my life anyway, that's how it happened for me. And when I left New York, and then started traveling, and then I went to India, and then that opened up to Singapore, and then from Singapore, and then all these retreats around Southeast Asia started to happen, and all of a sudden I'm bouncing around the world, and I'm like, wow, okay, life isn't this bubble of pain that I thought, it was gonna be, because I thought I was gonna live and die in New York. I was from New York, and I had to make sure that my parents' needs were met and their desires of me, and somehow navigate what I wanted with that, and just live and die. And that was my limited perception of what my life would be.
Right.
Until I decided, and I made that choice, that no, this is gonna hurt, but I don't want what you want for me. I want to create what I want to create for me. So I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna go 9,000 miles away, and I'm gonna take a 3-month break. And I did that, and they were like, all right, 3 months is fine. You go to India for 3 months. And then I came back, and then it was a year, and then I was in New York, and then something in me just called, and it was like, no, I can't stay here. I got to go back. So then I went back to India for 6 months. They're like, what are you doing? 6 months. And it's like, okay, let's just wait. Like, I'm going to do it anyway. 6 months, just give me some time. And after 6 months, I decided to come to Singapore because I was offered a job here. And then now it's like 6.5 years, almost 7 years I've been out of New York City. And in that time, I've grown, I've learned so much. And I couldn't have done that if I stayed in my pain story and in my victimhood, surrounded by the negativity of my parents. It just wouldn't be possible.
And that inflection point was you doing these particular methods of acting, or was it yoga? What was the kind of event? Or maybe it was a series of events.
Yeah, I know. It's not very linear, huh?
Yeah, it never is, right?
It's never linear, because sometimes things happen later on, and sometimes you have really big things happen very early on, and you don't really understand them until much later on. And so for me, it was a combination of all those things. So the acting training, I didn't know it at the time, but it gave me the tools to be able to speak and present in front of people. I didn't know I would be doing that when I was in college. It also gave me an awareness as to how I would move through space and own my body. And also yoga was was in acting school. That's where I learned it. That's at 19. That's where that was like the seed that was planted. And then when I deepened into the yoga practice, it became a lot more than just physical postures. It became this whole mind-body experience where I was starting to realize, if I put my mind to it, and I know this is so cliche because you hear this all the time, if you put your mind to it, it will happen. And that I was actually experiencing that. I was like, wow, if I put my mind to this posture that seems so freaking impossible right now, I can actually do it. And it happens slowly over time. And because I was seeing a result, I just started to believe in it more. And as I believed in it more, I surrendered into it. So I didn't start overanalyzing it. I didn't doubt it. You know, when you start something new, you go, oh, is this really beneficial for me? What are the benefits? Why am I doing it? Like, we go into this doubt place, which is great. It just means that we care. But as I stopped doubting it, then I started to have emotional experience. So these emotional experiences were very surprising. I'd be at the end of yoga, you would be laying down in shavasana, which is corpse pose. It's this final relaxation posture where you lay down like a corpse. And the whole point of corpse pose is that you're practicing how to die. And that sounds super morbid, but it's not. Dying in a metaphorical sense, like in an emotional sense. Like, okay, letting that kernel of rage just calm down. Letting whatever it is, like a heightened state of emotion, let that die. Heightened state of who you think you are, like let that die. You know, and letting your muscles melt, let your bones, let your physical body melt. And so there's this dying that happens at the end of class that when you fully let go, something happens. So in that full letting go, there's something that remains, and that's your attachment. It's revealed like in that moment. So if I'm like fully letting go of my bones and my muscles and some gravity, but yet there's like a flicker of something, like what is that? And those moments, it was the memory of my body remembering of pain and of suffering and of the trauma that was caused to me as a child. You know, my mom didn't think it was a big thing. I brought this up maybe a few months ago with her, and I said, do you remember that time when I didn't eat, I don't know, something, like I didn't eat what you wanted me to eat, and I was probably 3 or 4, and you put me on the high chair, and then you strapped me into it, and for a 3-4-year-old, like sitting in a high chair, it's quite high, right? It feels like you're on top of a building. And she kind of just put me outside of the apartment, like on the 4th floor of our Brooklyn apartment, and I was just howling. I was screaming so loud, and all the neighbors like opened the doors, and she didn't think it was a big deal. She thought it was like good parenting. She was, it was to her perception was that she was disciplining me for misbehaving. To me, I stored that as like this huge traumatic pain story of being rejected, abandonment, right? And something so small as that we carry. And so I would feel that. You know, I would feel the times when, you know, she would kind of like strike me and like with a belt on my back, and like so I felt all this like pain on my back, you know, stuff on my shoulders, because she had I can joke about it now, but it wasn't funny then.
I'm sure.
So in Cantonese it's called a tang tiu, and a tang tiu is like it's like a truncheon. It's like a baton that policemen they carry, and they like beat you with it, because that's what they experience, right? So I mean, you can't buy a police baton in New York City, right? Right? So they would get a feather duster, and they go, okay, choose your poison. And we would go and we'd pick, and then she would get the feather duster, and she would like break it on us. Like she would hit us so hard that it would break. And if she didn't have that, she would get a belt. If she didn't have that, she would get a broom. And I look back on it, and it's, you know, I joke about it with my siblings, and sometimes with my other friends who had that experience growing up, and we can joke about it. But as a child, it wasn't funny because it freaking hurt. And you're like, why am I getting beat right now? Like, and it's not like a spank, you know, it's like a full on like, and so I would feel all of that unraveling at the end of yoga class. And I would just break down into tears. And it wasn't like I was thinking about that. It just arrived because I was in this process of emptying, and my body just needed to acknowledge the fact that I was hurt, and it needed to process that pain. Whereas those times when I was a child, I had to hold it in. I couldn't show weakness. I had to keep it in because if I cried, I would get hit more.
Yeah.
So all I could do was like go like this and shut up and hope that she would stop.
Yeah. But I mean, when people do yoga, I mean, I feel like there's two types of people who do yoga, right? So maybe I'm widely categorizing it, but people do it because it's like trendy. It's like the thing to do. You wear your Lululemons and then, you look freaking fit and you want to feel like you're healthy. And then people who actually have spiritual experiences by doing yoga. And how do you actually get from, that, the former to the latter? Because I've never been able to kind of figure out how you have such a kind of a divide between the two.
Well, I don't see it so much as a divide. I just see it as people on their journey, on their path. I think it can happen in a flip of a switch.
Right.
It's the willingness to make the choice to want to go there. That's all it is.
Okay.
It's like, and once you make that choice and you're really sure about it, then you end up going there.
Right.
I've seen people shift in a month. I've seen people shift in a very long time. And I've seen people who have been practicing forever and ever, but it's still only a physical experience to them because they will only allow it to be a physical experience. So you're only gonna receive what you're ready for, and that's where and it's your mind. Your mind decides that.
So is it the willingness to want that spiritual experience that actually crosses over, or it just happens?
I don't think it's the willingness to want a spiritual experience because then it's an idea and a perception of what you think an experience will be, and then it's just thinking about it instead of actually wanting it to happen. I think, unfortunately, it takes tragedy and a lot of pain and suffering to want to then leave that pattern. When you have enough like physical pain, you go decide to see a doctor or a chiropractor or whatever it is, right? When you suffer enough from like your emotional baggage where you keep making the same anxious choices that are not in your best interest. Like for me, I used to be so anxious about all the choices I made because I had issues with my self-worth. I felt like, everything that came out of my mouth was like constantly judged. I felt like other people were looking down on me because of, my history. So because I was so anxious around people all the time, I really censored what I would say. I would even my mannerisms. I remember in acting school, it was like, oh, don't be too gay. And now I don't fucking care. I'm just I'm just me.
Yeah.
If I feel like gesturing like this, I'm going to gesture like this. Yeah. Whereas oh, I have to play straight. I have to be a certain way. And so I was like super anxious about being found out or whatever it was. And so once I had the willingness to change that pattern, I was like, I'm going to change the pattern. So then I made the effort to practice not giving a shit about if someone thought I was too freaking gay.
Right.
Like, I am the way I am,
Yeah. And it takes a lot of mental power to decide that, right? Or actually roll with that.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, I couldn't have done it alone. I needed the help of community, of my teachers, the constant reinforcement, reading self-development books, going to meditation workshops.
Yeah.
But I had to choose to go to those experiences and to work on that. And if you are choosing yoga for just physical health reasons, that's great. That's where you are. That's the point in your journey that you're at. Yeah. And if you're choosing to use yoga as a vehicle towards expanding your consciousness, great. That's the that's the point of the mountain you're at. And there's I don't judge people as to where they are. So I used to, early on in my teaching, I was like, oh my God, I don't want to work with this person. They only see yoga as, it's superficial. But then I have to remember that's how I saw it when I started. I thought of it as like, it's just part of, it's available in acting school, and Madonna does it. So it's a trendy thing that they're making actors do, and they want us to be physically fit for Hollywood. These were the thoughts in my head. Sure. And then slowly over time, I mean, for me, it happened rather quickly. Like I would say, like in the course of like 4 years. Right. I mean, that's not quick, but
it's not quick at all.
But to me, it felt quick. The reason it felt quick to me was because from 19 to like 23, I was like, wait, from 1 to 19, I was like, wait, what happened? Yeah. So in that time, comparatively to my upbringing, yes, it was quick. And so, it just started to happen naturally because there was no other choice for me. In order for me to be a more authentic actor and a more authentic person, more empowered, everything I was surrounded by teachers that were like, be more truthful, be more authentic, be you.
Yeah.
This was 4 years. Doom, 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 doom.
Yeah.
You know, so because of that, I just, sorry, I can't. I keep gesturing and like knocking into
You're a
things.
kinetic person.
I gotta calm my gestures down. Gotta filter my gestures. So because of that, I had to.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I think, you know, maybe there was like an external force that made you do it to be a better actor, you know, or something that, you know, that inside you that decided, okay, I gotta break the pattern. I gotta, you know, be more authentic, congruent to myself, all that. But you know, maybe there are people who are still stuck in that negativity without the revelation that they need to fix themselves, or you know, they're still think that this is normal, you know, and I should just carry it with me. It's a bit shameful to express it so freely, etc. I mean, is there something that you can actually do to these type of people where, you know, you give them a gentle push in the back, you know, and maybe, you know, maybe yoga is the thing, but I'm sure, you know, even from what I heard from you is that it wasn't actually the yoga itself or actually the training that you got from the acting itself that you came to this decision, right? It was, I guess it's not linear, so it's like combination of all these factors that said, you know, I got to, you know, push forward. I need to kind of break open, right? And you know, it does take a lot of willpower, you know, strength, mental strength to get there, and I think a lot of people don't have it.
Well, no, I don't think that's true, because we have a lot of mental capacity. If we look at the computers and we look at, I mean, everyone's in their mind. So we do have the mental capacity. It's just the matter of surrounding ourselves with the community that will support us in wanting that. And I mean, I think it's really hard in Singapore and in Asian cultures because the emphasis is so much on the family unit. Yeah. And whereas being, you know, born and raised in America, the emphasis is on individuality and personal freedoms. And valuing that. And so I, as a bicultural child, being raised in two cultures, you go home to restriction and respect your elders, and then you go to school and you learn about express, create, right? Individuate. Yeah. I eventually, because I was exposed to that and I was surrounded by more of that, because I had, you know, I mean, school is big. There's lots of people in school, and you see, there's TV. Yeah. You go to the movies. You have friends. You have a whole social life. You're in a whole country where that's what's being taught. So it's hard in Singapore because the emphasis is on family and expectations of what your family wants of you. And so people don't feel like they have a choice. This is a very Singaporean phrase. No choice. Yeah. I don't have a choice. You hear this all the time. Like, oh, no choice. I have to go. I have to do it. And I'm not bashing people who care about their family and they love their families. I'm not saying I don't love my family. It's just that my love doesn't show itself in the way that your family looks. Yeah. My family, like, I don't live with them. And however, the definition of, you know, what a normal, loving, you know, life, a good family home life is in Singapore, unfortunately, is one note. This is all you can have. You know, you all the generations they live nearby. Like, it's a very old-fashioned kind of, you know, and you take care of your parents. And like, I'm not saying don't take care of your parents. No, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying, like, how do we navigate between our passions and what we want out of our lives and to take care of them? You know, how far do we go in taking care of them? Do we do everything that they want us to do? Probably not, right? Because some of their demands might be unreasonable. Yeah. So it's about setting boundaries that are healthy for both, for all generations. And that's something that is not that is not something people do here. And it's like, okay, I'm going to do what mommy wants, what daddy wants. Yeah. And so you have like people in their 40s and their 50s afraid of what their parents will think. Yeah. Because for some reason, you know, it's like they feel like they still have to appease what mommy and daddy wants. And And so sometimes I have clients who don't want to tell, like if let's say they're getting a divorce or some major life decision, they won't tell their parents. You are 45 years old. What do you mean you won't tell your parents? Oh, because of this, because they're worried about what other people will think.
Right.
And I learned not to give a shit about what other people think a long time ago. And I think that's something that needs to be taught and supported. And unfortunately, what happens is people end up just complaining and bitching with other friends, and they don't actually take any real action.
And you know, I think that's something that you know, it's not only peculiar or special to Asian cultures either, right? I mean, there's a lot of expectations from parents from all different sorts of cultures, and
for sure,
and also society as well, right? And even like, you know, the word success. You know, a lot of times it's used for monetary success. It's not about happiness. It's not about, you know, love. I mean, it's always about how do you climb the social rankings, how much money you have, what kind of fucking house you have, a boat, and all this shit. And then, you know, you don't even know what the hell you want out of your own life because, you know, there's so much, you know, like, you know, judgmental, you know, people or ideas thrown at you, and you're completely jaded. You can't see what you want. And how do you like break free from that? That's what I always kind of think. And it takes a huge fucking, like, you know, giant step to say, I don't give a fuck about that. This is what I'm going to do. Right. And because you're going against a huge tide, right, of society, your parents, your friends, and everybody else that thinks that way.
Well, if there's even a kernel of wanting that in you, of wanting to break free of that, go find other people who think and feel that way and spend time with them. Go to workshops where people are exploring their limiting beliefs and redefining their life purpose. Go to seminars. Go do those things. Surround yourself with like-minded people. There are so many organizations out there and self-development workshops out there. I mean, it's huge, like life coaching, you know, spiritually. I mean, if you're more spiritually inclined, you know, people are going to use different language.
Right.
If you're more secular, you're going to go to more of a self-development, like Tony Robbins kind of thing, right? There's so many things that people can do. So, I mean, you just have to do it.
Right. Yes. I mean, that's the thing that most people have the most trouble in doing, right? Well, they always have an excuse. It's too expensive. You know, I can't leave my house because I have a job and I can't go to India to go to the ashram or whatever. You know, there's always fucking excuses, right?
Well, that's what someone said to me, you know, in New York. They said it was my publicist actually, who has been fantastic, you know, with helping me to spread the word about my book. But he also said that it might come across as a little bit arrogant that you get to go and travel around the world and have all these experiences, and it might come across as selfish. And I was like, okay, I can see that, because people who are in a place where they feel like they don't have the luxury of doing what I've done. It's not like I come from a wealthy family. My parents were like dirt poor, and they worked their way up from, you know, having nothing after everything was taken away from the communists, right? And they were blue collar, you know, workers. And my dad was my dad was a grocery store owner, and my mom was a seamstress. Like that's my background. You know, so but yet somehow this whole eat, pray, love thing of having the luxury of traveling, and but that's a conditioned program that you have programmed into your mind, or unconsciously or consciously decided that you are not able to have that experience. So it's not believable, it's not plausible, and so you're now some arrogant person babbling about you know, your existential quandaries as you run around the world trying to discover who the hell you are. But these are the choices that I made in my life, and I saved up my money, I did what I did, and I decided to do that instead of invest in a house or put it in my savings account. Like that like these are the choices I made. So if I chose a different route and I decided to take the money I made from waiting tables or bartending or whatever and my yoga teaching gigs and put it into a house or whatever. I don't know. Like maybe my life would be different.
Yeah.
But I decided to invest in the moment. And I didn't necessarily think about, I didn't really think about a savings account until I came to Singapore.
Right.
Like I just like constantly emptied my savings.
Yeah.
And that was a fear that I had because in the back of my mind, my parents were like, oh, you should have the savings. You should save for retirement. These are things that I don't want. Yeah. And I know I don't want that. I want to live now. And there was this strange, there's this strange thing that people think that you live your life for retirement, and that always just didn't sit right with me.
Yeah, I don't get that either.
And there's statistics out there that show that most people, I don't know what the numbers are. I'm really bad with remembering data and numbers, but the percentage of people that will survive like after 65, from 65 to 85 is not. I can't remember if it was like 65% or 85%. But if you just think about it, it doesn't matter what the number is. Most of us we may not make it past retirement. Sure. We might just die.
or hospitalized for the 20 years.
You don't know, right? Yeah. So why am I saving all of this money to travel when I'm old and I can't move so well?
Yeah.
I want to travel now. I want to enjoy my life now. And so you see a lot of young, successful entrepreneurs traveling around the world, and then people hate them for it. People hate you because you get to go on the holidays you go on because you decided to create the life you wanted to live because they're in the pattern of judgment and the pattern of being self-limiting and whatever it is. And that's where they are in their journey. Right. And so I don't know what the question was anymore, but now,
I don't think there was
I'm
even
rambling.
a question. Yeah. But you wish your life was more like Benjamin Button situation where you like start out old and you can live your retirement super young and healthy and sexually active. But it's not true. And I also believe that, you got to work hard, but you also have to like reward yourself, spend whatever, time you have to improve yourself, enrich yourself, experience a lot of shit in the world that you would never get to do when you're like 70 years old, right? And that's an experience that you actually accumulate, and then what you will look like at age 70 is what you've done through all those 70 years of your life, right? And do you want to be like a person at a 70 said, I did all the shit that I wanted to do and I'm still going to keep going? Or are you regretting the 70 years that you lived and said, I should have done this, right? And that's for me, that was like always in the back of my head all throughout my youth. And it was like, I'm going to fucking do whatever I want, like I don't care what my mom tells me. Don't get a fucking tattoo. Don't pierce your ears. Don't do drugs. I did all of that, right? Like, I'm going to do all of that. Too. Right? It's like everything that you're going to tell me not to do, I'm going to do fucking all of that, right?
It's reverse psychology, right?
Yeah.
Like you put restrictions on the creative spirit, and of course, what does the creative spirit do? It comes out and does it anyway.
Yeah.
You can't limit, what's already in us.
Right.
And all of that is just a reflection on their control and what it says about them, but at the end of the day, it is a gift because all that restriction I had as a child did propel me, all of that doubt and all that, that fueled me to become who I am today. And I think it's important to also show gratitude for our parents for fucking us up, because if they didn't, I would probably be very one note and living a very dull life, and that kind of is the point of our human experience, is to experience the highs of the highs and the lows of the lows, and then to find our own middle ground.
Right.
And that's our way. Because if I didn't know all of that pain and all that suffering, if I didn't experience that, I wouldn't have known the elation of being, so blissed out in meditation and even wanting to go there, because there was no contrast between the light and the shadow. And this is something they talk about in, the Yoga Sutras, which is oneness. What is this oneness about? And I mean, there's not many words on it because the sutras are just like short little blips of Sanskrit words, and then it's kind of like Chinese aphorisms are just 5 words, and then there's a whole story. And so this concept of oneness and universality, it's think of it as a coin. So there's heads and there's tails. So if we think of heads as positivity and positive thinking and like all these things that people are like, oh, you should be positive all the time and happy and da-da-da-da. Then there's also the tail side, which is the dark stuff, the negativity, the self-doubt, the anger, the grief, whatever it is. So you have these 2 sides, but they're of the same coin. So that's our human experience. And a lot of spiritual teachings, unfortunately, are very one-sided. They only focus on the positive side. And this is very much in the Asian way of teaching spirituality, which I don't agree with. It's all about let's look at what is positive. Just think positive. Be the change you want to be. Like, that's all great, but you can't do that until you address your shadows. You can't do that until you felt and processed and acknowledged that you've been hurt. Everyone's been hurt, whether big or small ways. I don't care if your biggest hurt in life was that you discovered that Santa Claus was not real. That might be your biggest hurt.
Very traumatic.
Right? That could be it. And maybe that is the level of trauma you have in your life. Maybe the level of trauma you have in your life is losing everyone you love and you were orphaned. I don't know. Like, we can't compare traumas. But the fact is that we've all been hurt on some level. And if we don't acknowledge that hurt, we can't grow from it. And that's something that spiritual teachings in like this day and age need to focus on. We cannot just do positivity seminars. It doesn't work. Positive thinking doesn't work until you've addressed why you think the way you do what does this negative belief system do for you? What are the benefits of you thinking that way? Why? And then when you understand the why, then you can shift.
Right. And does like meditation come into that kind of method of dealing with negativity?
For me, meditation in the traditional sense, from the more monastic traditions, yogic breath work, pranayam. Pranayam is the controlling of energy via the breath. And so you do all these kinds of manipulations of the breath by changing the counts of the breath, holding the breath, and then expelling the breath on certain counts. There's all different types of variations, breathing through this nostril, that nostril, or both, through the chest, through the ribs, through the belly. And so there's so many different ways to breathe and so many different rhythms. And so when you change the breath, you change the chemistry of the brain. And when you change the chemistry of the brain, you start to alter your mood and the way that emotions are, going through your physical body and how you experience them. And so it's kind of an outside-in approach. It's almost like a quick fix. So if you're panicking, you could do something called alternate nostril breathing, which just helps to rebalance the brain. And you just keep doing that. Now, and you can just spend, maybe 5-10 years just doing that every time you have this moment. Or you could go the route of looking at why you have that moment and address it head on. And that's hard. That's a very hard thing for most people to do. And the yogic tools are there to help you to shift your physical container so that you create space so that you can maybe go there at a accelerated pace. So there's many different ways. So and if you're looking at more like Buddhist Zen types of meditation, it's all about observing and witnessing your consciousness and who am I, observing the self. And so it's very cerebral, actually, these monastic types of meditation. You can even see in some of the monks that their heads are so big in comparison to their bodies because the emphasis is placed so much on the mind. There's so many different schools of meditation, and different monasteries have emphasis on different parts of the meditation. For me, what's really important, because I am kinesthetic and it may not work for everyone, is my body. I have to address my body because my body contains my emotions, and I feel things in a very amplified way. So I can feel, anxiety when it's in a room. In a room full of people, if people are really anxious, I have to watch if that anxiety is mine or if it's the room's. that's how sensitive I am to my environment and things that are happening around me. And because of that, I have to really take care of my physical body through more dynamic types of meditations, through movement meditations, through shaking, through dancing meditations, swaying, and then also inquiry. And also because I'm a very cerebral person too, I'm not just kinesthetic. I love to ponder on things. Yeah. I have to ask questions. And once you start asking questions as I'm moving and exploring, then something starts to happen. That's how I drop in. That's how I tune in. So through something that I do called the inner guidance process, which is created by Amara Samata, who is my mentor and the creator of this process. It is an exploration into the mind, the body, the energy systems, and also the psychology of why things are the way they are, why you made decisions the way why you make decisions the way you make them, and exploring the old story, the old self, and then eventually having enough courage to let that old self shed and let that go, so that your new self and what you're about to become can emerge. And so a lot of that work requires us to use our mind, our body, our emotions, our energy, the whole self, the whole system. And a lot of, I find that, I did start with just a lot of mental types of meditation, and I found that it made me really angry, and which was the benefit of doing those meditations. It made me realize that, wow, okay, I can't just sit here. Like a lot of people talk about doing Vipassana for 10 days, and it's like this bucket list. It doesn't appeal to me. I don't want to do Vipassana because my system, they say, don't do yoga, don't do this, don't. It's all about don't. Right. And, and people kind of now check out your CV or like, oh, hey, did you do your Vipassana? You're a meditation teacher. Have you done your 10 days of silence? I've done many different types of silences where I don't necessarily I don't feel drawn to it. Right. And that's the honest truth. I don't feel the need to put that kind of restriction on me, because I've had experiences where I've connected to my outer and my inner environment in a place that felt very honest and authentic to me, where I felt like I was in a creative flow. And for me, and Vipassana is a very masculine system. Okay. There's a lot of do's and don'ts, yamas and niyamas. You can do this, but you can't do this. Yeah. And so there's this whole structural container, which is all the monastic traditions are very masculine. It's mainly monks. And so lots of rules and regulations. More of the feminine traditions, they're not at the tantric paths. They're lesser known, and they're more about allowing and surrendering into what already is happening. Right. And so the inner guidance process is that. Right. You have anger or you have hate. Let's amplify that. Let's see what it does to your body. Let's allow it to happen. Right. And observe. It, and then let's question it. Right? Because we're not going to waste anything. Right. We're not going to waste the fact that you're lying here right now in your energy coaching session and having some sort of emotional experience. Yeah. Let's use that emotion and let's dig into it and figure out where it's coming from. Yeah. And that's where the mind comes in. Right? And that's the beauty of the mind. And so when you start to put all these elements together, you start to unravel who you are and who you think you are, and then who you want to become. And it's ultimately, all spiritual work is about rewriting your story. I see. And what kind of story do you want to have? Do you want to have your parents' story? Like, I don't want to do my parents' story. I want to do my story. Yeah. And then we get to live our life writing our story, and that's the magic of it. I see. And you also talked about ayahuasca in your book, right? And I kind of felt that you've explained the physical experience of it, but not the actual psychological experiences of that. And this is something that I've been really curious about myself. And I tried different drugs in my life, but I have never tried something that would I had to let go of like a lot of control, even like visually or mentally, and I have to like succumb to whatever that's like coming at me, right? So I've been always interested, not about the letting go control, but like the maybe there's something that they always talk about is like the
the dissipating of self-ego, and I hear that all the time, and I'm trying to really kind of understand that before, like I want to, experiment on this thing.
Sure. Yeah, I don't talk so much about the process of it because honestly, it was hard to recall it in a linear fashion because it was so non-linear, so out of time, out of body, and I've done it 4 times.
Oh, yeah.
And the first time I did it, I was like, this is not for me. I don't want to do this ever again. Yeah. It was a full surrender, full loss of control. My sense of, and the reason I didn't write so much about the process was because it was more about what I gained from it. So it was just another tool that or another experience that just kind of I came across, and I was hearing about it a lot, and people were talking about it wherever I was, and then I was all of a sudden invited into this like little Amazonian meditation circle where we did it in New York. And don't tell anyone. And so
tell me later.
And so the experience for me during the process was a complete shattering of reality as I knew it. Like the way I see you right now is not the way I didn't see with my eyes. I saw with my consciousness, if that makes sense.
Interesting.
I didn't know where my toes were. My toes were like tickling my heart, and my heart was out there across the room, and it was also in the sky. I was everywhere, and then I was nowhere at the same time. And so I had this huge, because I am such a kinesthetic person, my body was everywhere and nowhere, and I could not, and that really freaked me out because then there was a part of me that was thinking, because I was like, okay, where's my mind? My mind's not my brain. Where is it? And so then there was a part of me that was fighting that experience in the very beginning, and I felt like sick to my stomach. But then I didn't know where my stomach was. Like, what is this feeling? Why am I still feeling things if I have no body? And then I was perceiving all of these apparitions and spirits and all of these things that were floating around me, as if I see you right now. The man next to me was dying of terminal cancer, and everyone else around the circle. I arrived late into this particular circle, and the shaman invited us to share an intention or something that we were working on. And I just I was, I don't know, it was 20-something, mid-20s, and I just blurted something out along the lines of, I just want to figure out what I want to do with my life. Do I continue being an actor, or do I move on with the spiritual path and continuing to teach yoga and exploring all those other options? And then all the people that started talking after me, because I was like the second to go, were talking about like very serious things like abuse, like substance abuse. Like there was a heroin addict who was recovering, and someone from sexual abuse, and then terminal cancer, and all of these things that I was like, whoa, I feel so stupid for saying that. But that's just honestly where I was. I just didn't know I was coming into such a huge epic experience with all of these people. And so I started to and everything just happens so nothing's a coincidence. I happened to be in a room full of people who were experiencing these things because I started to see the energy apparitions that were around them. I started to see the things that were clouding around the person who was dealing with sexual trauma and abuse, and I saw the guardians that were hovering around the man who was dying from terminal cancer. I saw, the Mother Mary, and then I saw a Kali, who was a Hindu deity. And I saw like a Mother Teresa figure over him, and he was like glowing in this white. I mean, things that you can't really explain with your logical mind, and of course, my mind was there taking notes, like, ooh, I'm going to try to remember this, and I did remember that part. But then there were parts that I definitely did not remember, even though it's really, really trying hard to take notes. And it was like falling into this rabbit hole where it was like a kaleidoscope of like mandalas and fractal patterns, and it was like being in the strangest carnival ride, but I was trying to crawl out of it. I didn't want to go into it. And I was just falling down this hole. I kind of disappeared into the entire, it was like a big bang explosion, like from the inside out, and it was kind of orgasmic. I mean, it was very strange. It was there was a sense of ecstasy, but then deep pain at the same time. Like I felt it hurt so bad, but it was so orgasmic. And that was something that just blew, like, I can't even say mind. Like, it just blew my consciousness off. Like, I was like, what is this? And that was when I understood and experienced, oh, that's oneness. Oneness means all of that. All of it.
Right.
Like the highs and the lows, all of it. Orgasm, suffering, pain, all of it. It's the same. Not the same, but it's like it's all contained within our human experience, and it's available to us. And because we are put here on this earth, we are meant to experience it.
Yes.
And we shouldn't shun, and demonize the bad parts, and just highlight the good parts, and
Right.
So that was my process, and my revelation from that was, okay, I'm supposed to now move down. So that was kind of the impetus for me to kind of start letting go of my actor identity, because I started to realize that wasn't my true calling. And then I did it again a year later, and that was a lot more enjoyable because I surrendered into it. I didn't fight it. And then I was kind of chanting along with the shaman. I don't know what I was saying, but he sings these ikaros, which are these healing songs, and I don't know, I just knew words all of a sudden. I don't know where it was coming from. It was like a radio transmitter just kind of like feeding me words, and then these words were coming out of my mouth, and I was just chanting with them, and I was like having a good old time. And I had this very strong memory of I had already been here.
Right.
I've done this before. I was like sitting on the top of a mountain, and I was like in India, and I was like, I just kept shaking my head. I had my winter hat on. I was just like shaking my head and chanting with the shaman. Very silly, very playful, very goofy, and of course, like I'm under the influence of ayahuasca, right? So I'm not, I wasn't like making fun of anything. It's just honestly how my body was expressing itself, and I was playing this archetype of the old Indian sage sitting atop the mountain.
Yeah.
And so I was playing this, and it just felt like I had done this already. I know this. And so, and then the following experiences I've had were very similar, but like with different, like more animals, and it was like a zoo in one of them, in one of the experiences. So I had very visual, very kinesthetic experiences, and each time I did it, I walked away with a deeper understanding as to the invisible reality that surrounds us.
Right.
And that even if we don't know it with our left brain, we are surrounded by forces that we can't always explain with our rational mind, and that we have to trust. So it really taught me to surrender and to really trust deeply, and that the universe has got my back, and that even if I fall and I feel like I'm failing, I'm not really failing, because that's just an experience that's going to propel me into a realization.
Right. So you kind of understand why people use this as a rite of passage, or not people, but back in those in tribes, the Incan tribes, they use.
Yeah, it was a visionary experience. It's like, this is your vision quest. Here you go. Let's figure out what's going on in your psyche. What kind of demons are you battling? And I did that in the first round, and then the second, third, and the fourth were very, very, very euphoric. And I didn't feel the need to, like, there are people that are really called to this medicine, and I would do it again if I were called to it, if it was honestly something that I felt from my heart that I needed to experience again, or something that was needing some sort of clarity on. But I got what I needed from it, and so I didn't feel I don't feel that.
And it seems like, between your first experience and your second, you probably seem like a different person, though.
Oh, totally. I mean, so much had happened between the first and second time. It was a whole year.
Right.
And the first one, I mean, most people that I've spoken to who have done ayahuasca say that the first time is very deconstructive. It's kind of like you take an old derelict building, you just like, you're like, okay, go away. And then you're like, you're left with like ruins.
Right.
And then so the second time, it's like, oh, I'm creating something now.
Right.
Like, it's a build on the building I just knocked down. It's a dissipation of the old self.
Right. Huh. And this has also helped you, kind of regain yourself, or kind of, allowed you to grow from this experience, obviously.
Yeah. I don't think it's just the ayahuasca. I think it's a combination of many. I don't know what my experiences with ayahuasca would have been if I didn't do all the other things, like, the meditations, that the mental ones and the physical, and the more kinesthetic ones, the acting training, if the yoga, Reiki, visualization, shamanic practices. If I didn't do all of those things, I don't know what that experience would have been like, because I also know people who have done it who have had not so helpful experiences, in terms of processing what they did. They just had a really powerful experience that they couldn't necessarily put any meaning to. And when you have such abstract experiences and they don't apply to your day to day, and you can't figure out what that bridge is, there's not as much power in that experience. And so if you're drawn to it, I would recommend that you have done some sort of self-work. It's not just like, hey, I want to do this recreationally, and I just want to feel like I want to feel high, and like it's not a recreational thing. I mean, but also the beauty of ayahuasca and the plant medicine, because the indigenous people believe that the ayahuasca has a spirit, right, and that Mama Ayahuasca is going to show you what you're ready to see,
right.
And so if you're not ready to see it, you may not see it. So I had very visual kinesthetic experiences, and then I had a friend who had a very cerebral experience where it was literally her and herself, and they were talking to themselves like a psychiatrist talking to, and it was just like that. And she said it was horrific because it was like 6 hours of like talking to yourself, and it was so vivid. So everyone and then I've also talked to people who have felt very little, and it was just a physical purging. So really, you are met, with the medicine wherever you are. Right. And then, so the more conscious excavating you do on yourself, the more that experience is going to be, and then it just kind of propels you into a new place. Whereas if you just come to it like just never doing any sort of self-development work, never looking at your fears or your limiting beliefs, and you just jump into it, you might just have like a I don't know what kind of experience you would have, but it may not be as useful for you.
Right. Yeah. I guess, tread with caution, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, when people do ask me about ayahuasca, I always ask them, why do you want to do it? Yeah. Like, what is the why?
Yeah. I mean, I always wanted to kind of see myself clearer, and progress, and I'm at the age and point in my life that I don't need recreational drugs to have recreation. I just want to do it so that I can be better, or grow from that experience, and it's.
But then specifically, how do you want to grow?
Yeah, that's true. That's a good question. Maybe that's kind of like a little bit vague for me at this point. Like how.
And I think when it becomes more specific, then and when your reason is more clear, then the opportunities and the pathway to go do it will just open up for you.
Right. Yeah. I do a lot of meditation as well, and what's interesting about meditation is that, and my previous yoga teacher taught me this, but they said you'll start to realize the things that are happening around you more clearly, and why. And then if you have a certain like want or something, you'll be able to identify the solutions or what you're actually looking for, and they all seem to like always happen, or maybe because my eyes are more open to that, because I don't know, maybe my mind's clearer or something. But that was and I did have those kind of experiences, like when I thought about, or at that time when I was thinking about, I want to do this and I want to achieve this, and then I'll find the tools or the networks, some kind of connection to get me there, and it's surprisingly very clearly, and it came to me. So I don't know if that's kind of part of what meditation is about. Probably not, but but that was maybe like a byproduct or something like that.
I think you're talking about manifestation, like manifesting something that you want to happen into reality. So if there's a particular project or whatever it is, or something that you're trying to achieve, and you can kind of see a clear pathway. I wouldn't call that meditation. I would call that more manifesting. And that meditation could, all of the things that we do is not actually meditation. Meditation is a state. It's not a doing. And so all the tools and techniques that we actually employ to arrive into a space where we can feel connection, because meditation is essentially our connection between our inner environment and our outer environment, and then all of it is one. And in that space of just being and oneness, it's almost like, if you look at a river is not trying to do the water.
Yeah.
It's not trying to like push the water down the stream. It just is doing that. It just is. It's just flowing. You look at a rock, it's not like I'm just gonna stand here as still as I can. It just is a rock. And so when we meditate, we're trying to remember our natural flow and our natural rhythm as human beings, and that we are. And this is where it gets confusing, because then what's the balance between being and doing? Because if we're just in this like kind of
Vegetative
space,
state,
then we might as well just be a rock and a river. And this has been the dilemma that we have been having in the spiritual community for a very long time. So people associate meditation nowadays in a very superficial sense. It is just it's the process of eliminating something we don't want. And that's what people use meditation for.
Okay.
And that actually, if you use meditation techniques to do meditation in that way, it's actually just it's a escape mechanism.
And what do you mean by like eliminating something?
Well, for example, like the stress.
Okay.
Right.
Right.
Okay. Right now, for example, I'm in a very stressful time. I'm moving countries.
Yeah.
I have to sell my motorcycle. I had to, sell my business. My studio. I was breaking my lease. I had to, find someone to take over the lease. I have all these clients I need to transfer to a new studio that we merged with. The list is extensive, like the amounts of things that I have to do. So it could be very stressful. Now, old me would have been like, oh my God, I'm so stressed. I need to like do something to eliminate the stress. And a lot of people want the result of having the stress eliminated without actually looking at their perception of that stress.
Right.
And so when you use meditation techniques as a way to almost like medication. Meditation is it's not like pills. You don't just take it and something goes away. Right. You have to like be with it. You have to be with the stress. You have to like embody it and like, oh, where's that stress? Oh, that stress is in my shoulder. It's my shoulder because my shoulders carry this burden, this grief of like whatever it is from blah, 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 blah. And there's this belief system when I was a child and when my parents said this and that. And now it's made me look at the world like this. And it's like, that's why I'm so stressed now, because I look at the world because my parents told me to look at the world like that. And until you understand that and like dig that deep and that far back, you're still going to be stressed. So then you're just going to continue, either taking your pills or like whatever, doing your restorative yoga or putting your eye pillows and like doing your lavender baths and like all this stuff, which is great. I'm not saying that's bad, but these are coping mechanisms. I'm not interested in coping.
Right.
Like a lot of people in the wellness industry, they're all about coping. And I'm like, I don't want to cope. So I'm going to embrace my stress because it is a stressful time.
Right.
Because I'm moving countries, literally. So it makes sense that I have stress, but the stress doesn't impact me in the way where I freak out. I can still do all the things that I'm doing. After this, I have to go meet someone at church to go sell my motorcycle, like at like 10 o'clock at night. Like I'm going to do those things because my perception of how the stress plays in my body is not, it's not the same as it was like 10 years ago.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's... This is the thing with meditation. We have to, from a very like zoomed out lens, yes, meditation does help to reduce anxiety and stress and brings calm and inner peace and all these things. But that is from a result-oriented lens.
Right.
Those things happen only if you investigate all the other aspects of yourself, all the many hats that you've ever worn or will decide to wear in your life. You have to look at those choices. And if you don't, then it's just one piece of the pie.
Yeah. But I like that. The way you said it is like everything now is like result oriented, right? So anything that you do has to come with a result. It's all about ROI, right? Like return on investment. You're going to spend money doing, yoga classes. You're going to spend money doing meditation classes, and everything has to come with a result. Otherwise, it's not even worth putting your money on. So, so how But I understand it's not about results, right? I mean, obviously you want results, but like you can't be focused so much on the result that you can't enjoy the journey to get there, right? Because you're only looking at if I don't see results today, tomorrow, and next week, it's not worth doing because it's not quick enough. And what's quicker, than doing this?
Well, this is an age-old spiritual question. Is enlightenment something that we attain, or is enlightenment the path itself? And this is so when you ask about results, is it a result? It's both. The answer is both. And that is the paradox of spirituality. That's why when you engage in deep spiritual practices, you realize that the answer is everything and nothing at the same time. When people say, "Oh my God, it's so not spiritual," when you're like having to market your spirituality and sell it for money, I'm like, well, we live in a paradoxical world, honey.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Like we got to pay our bills and we have to do all these things and make money, and we also at the same time need to deliver deep experiences.
Sure.
So then how do we reconcile the both? And it's a marrying of the spiritual and the earthly experiences, and that is spiritual, right? That is oneness. That is the whole point of everything.
Right.
So when I've struggled with this too, when I have to market something for a workshop that I do. Right, all of my marketing mentors, right? Because they had to learn about business. I don't freaking know about business. Like I'm in a business where I have to serve people, but I can't serve people unless I put myself out there. So I have to, I have to ask experts, and they're all about you have to market the result. People don't care about the process. This is what they say. People don't care about the process; they care about the result. And as I work with more and more clients, I can see that. They want to know that they're getting somewhere because that is how we're conditioned to think that we're being successful.
Yeah.
Again, it comes back to success.
Sure.
If we don't like reach a destination, like what's the point?
Yeah.
And I see the value in that. And so I get it. I have to translate it into I have to honor the fact that my clients or whoever it is that is very result oriented, I have to speak in their lingo, and then I sneak in the process. I don't maybe put as much emphasis on the process, but the process is already happening and it's unfolding while we're getting towards the result. And so it's the marrying of the two. And when we can marry the two, then something beautiful happens, a revelation, and then a shift, and then a change in behavior, a change in action. That's fine. I don't see a problem with now anymore with people saying, "Oh, get this or do this and you'll get this." And so that's how people are marketing meditation. Do meditation and you will, all of the science papers, Harvard Medical talking about if you do meditation, it will be good for your brain. It will change your brain's physiology. It will decrease your cortisol and your stress hormones. It will increase your heart function. It will increase your libido, right? It's saying do this and you'll get that.
Yeah.
This is scientific language. It's a very left brain kind of language. If we talked about it from a very right brain place, then it's like, there's no destination. It's about experiencing and allowing and surrendering and letting go. And it's the complete opposite of what we just said. But again, we're a left brain and we're a right brain. We're a masculine and a feminine energy put together.
Right.
And so we have to embrace both of them in order to be whole.
I like that oneness.
Oneness.
Yeah.
So abstract.
Yeah. No. I think it's all yin and yang. Right? It's you have to experience the bad to feel the good. What was it?
And something that Carl Jung says, he says, there's no coming to consciousness without pain.
Right.
Without pain is a motivator. It's a huge motivator. All of the big motivational speakers out there have some massive pain story.
Yeah, that's true.
And tragedy, there's a beauty in tragedy. You look at 9/11. You look at these hurricanes that keep happening more and more around the world. They bring people together. The aftermath. I'm not saying death and destruction is like, oh my God. Like, of course, my heart goes out to those people who are suffering, but there's something that happens after the fact where people come together and then there's a bonding, and that's kind of, and if we shift our perception, that's kind of the gift of all of the tragedy that we're experiencing in terms of, like, you know, climate related disasters, you know, all of these gun deaths in the United States. I mean, there's more and more gun deaths happening in the United States, and what they're doing is that they're the accumulation of the quantity of the ridiculousness of the how many people are dying from guns is really aggravating the people. And so that will eventually, what I feel is going to happen is that there is going to have to be a change in gun laws. I mean, it's been at a standstill for a very long time, but it's going to have to change. It just has to.
Right.
And
I mean,
that's a very sensitive topic, but if we look at tragedy from, like, there's a purpose as to why things happen.
Yeah. True. And I guess, you know, same with the climate change. I mean, if you don't actually see it in the surroundings around you, and not in Patagonia and Greenland and all these places where glaciers are melting, you don't even see that. Maybe you see it on a video on Facebook or Instagram, but, like, it's not really part of your actual life. But, you know, when it starts happening around you, which kind of is, right? I mean, the whole world's getting hotter. The hurricanes are getting stronger. The typhoons are getting stronger. Extreme climates everywhere. I mean, even though it's happening, I mean, you know, it's hard to get to the next step where, you know, people are feeling that we should, you know, make a difference, or we have to, you know, kind of step up and make that change happen. And but, you know, we don't want to get there. Right. But sadly, I think, you know, for anybody, you know, to bounce forward, you know, I think that's kind of what we need.
Yeah. And I think the whole point of why I wrote Sage Sapien is because my purpose, my Dharma, Dharma uses another word for purpose, is so that people can become more connected to their inner wisdom. Yeah. And wisdom is a felt thing. It's not just about thinking and knowledge base, informational based. It's about connecting to your emotional barometer. It's about connecting to your intuition, so that the choices that we make for whatever it is that you do in your life, whatever impact you're going to make in the world, is coming from your most truthful and authentic place. That's not clouded by, you know, the judgments of others, from your parents or wherever it is that you come from, whatever your history is. And so if the whole world can just unpack their stories and rewrite them, and everyone does that in their own way, then we'll have a very different world. You know, lawmakers will behave very differently. Governments will behave very differently. All the changes, and that's my belief, and that's my life purpose, is to create shifts from the inside out, starting first from the body and the mind and the emotions. And when those shifts can happen, you know, for scientists or, you know, whatever, politicians, and all of them are doing that, then, and people in positions of power, I mean, that will be, that's when everything will really begin to shift.
Yeah. And how can people be more in touch with these kind of, you know, ideas and mythologies? And, you know, it's just, I don't think it's just about going to yoga classes or meditation classes, right? I mean, how do they become more aware of, like, what you've experienced, what you think is the way forward?
I mean, there's so many books out there. There's, like, these podcasts, and there's so much information out there and content. And I think that the more open people are to exploring different topics on the subject, and just having conversations and getting off their phones, and well, I mean, in terms of, like, social media, but like using their phones for more useful endeavors, like, you know, listening to something educational. Then then they're exposed to more things. So,
All right. Well, great. This is an awesome conversation, and thank you very much, Johnson. And it's a bit sad for me to see you go to Sydney. You know, I think we were having a good time doing the yoga classes together, and, you know, you were making me so uncomfortable the whole time.
Well, you didn't show it.
Very uncomfortable. I was dying to get that Shavasana pose at the end.
Great. Well, thank you so much for inviting me, Taka.
No, thank you very much for coming. Thank you.
Future Design Podcast.